She was a loving mother who seemed to have it all.
She had a lot of promise, a lot of possibilities.
She was career-driven.
She had a real desire to provide a better life for her son.
Until a horrible crime cut her life short.
She got murdered immediately.
This was a brutal execution.
Look at the blood splatter.
Her back door was kicked in.
She has 3 gunshot wounds.
There were shell casings on the ground.
Could rejection be at the root of this crime?
She didn't want him.
He refuses to take no for an answer.
He killed her. He killed her. I know he did. Get help. Oh my God.
But solving this crime won't be easy.
This was a difficult case, a complicated case, an emotional case.
Police brought out helicopters to follow.
But all the signs were there that this was what the tragic ending was going to be.
I ain't do nothing.
Say it again.
Said I didn't do nothing.
April 14th, 2022. It's Thursday evening in Essex, Maryland, a former steel town just outside of Baltimore.
Once upon a time, Essex was a destination that people worked really hard to get to. But once the steel mill shut down, it kind of took the legs out of Essex.
Essex is growing in crime. There's a general fear with everyone that crime could hit your door.
Still, when 33-year-old Bradina Henson doesn't come to pick up her son from her brother's house, the two aren't immediately concerned.
Your mom not picking you up?
Bradina had actually made an agreement with her brother Carl to look after her son Trenton for a couple of days.
Easter was just days away, and she was planning to have a big Easter celebration.
She was preparing to have family and friends coming over.
Bradina was supposed to pick up her son on Wednesday, and she did not show.
And by Thursday, worry had started to set in.
She was a great mother. Her son was her world. So for her to not show up when she said she would, for her to not answer the phone, was very unusual.
So as any family that's concerned would, they went to her home.
But when Carl shows up with Bradina's 13-year-old son, Trenton, they immediately discover something unusual.
Check the door. The door is shut but not latched. That was already a red flag.
This was a neighborhood where people still close and lock their homes at night.
Mom!
Concerned, the two head inside.
Mom, you here?
They called for her and heard no response.
But upstairs,
Brandy?
they make a horrifying discovery.
They find Bradina lying face up on the bed.
Mom! Come on.
Carl goes over to her, trying to wake her, but she's motionless. He tells Trenton, call 911.
Born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, Bradina preferred her nickname.
She was known to her loved ones as Brandy.
When her biological parents couldn't raise her, relatives took her in as their own.
Bradina's aunt helped raise her.
She was cared for and loved.
Though it could be hard to crack Brandy's tough exterior, those who did immediately saw her tremendous potential.
People always just talked about her attitude. Ooh, that girl got an attitude on her. And I said, no, that's just her defense mechanism. Take an opportunity. If you sit down and you talk with her, you'll find out that she absolutely is just, the best young person ever.
And when Brandy truly cared for someone, she gave them her whole heart.
If you were special to her, you got everything that came with her. You got her love, you got her ferocity.
She would give you the shirt off her back.
Loving on people. That's just who Brandy was.
So it was no wonder that this hardworking, caring young woman chose a career in nursing.
Bradina was a nursing trainer at the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore City. And what Kennedy Krieger is known for is for helping children and adults with learning and emotional disabilities. To serve this population, you have to have a heart for people.
But Brandy's driving force was her son, Trenton.
She said over and over, Trenton is my world.
You like your food?
She was absolutely proud of him. And whenever she talked about him to me, she beamed.
She would do anything for him. They shared a special relationship.
Though Brandy and Trenton's father separated when he was a baby, the two remained on good terms.
I actually just spoke to your dad. He'll be here soon to pick you up.
Okay, let me go get my stuff.
Bradina and Darnell had a good co-parenting relationship.
Brandy also had someone special to share her life with.
Tavon Howard was Bradina's longtime boyfriend. They had been dating about a decade. He was an aspiring rapper.
This was someone that she counted on, someone that she confided in.
Hey, why are you looking so sad?
I had a rough day at work.
And Bradina stood by him through a lot of rough times. Tavon appreciated having a support system like that.
The two seemed like a couple meant to last.
They were each other's person for a long time.
And they were talking about getting married.
But now, their bright future may never come to pass.
Once Bradina's son and Carl stumble upon Bradina in her bed, lying unconscious. They call the authorities.
Baltimore County 911.
Yeah, I'm not immediately.
There was blood spatter everywhere, across the bed, along the walls.
And Trenton tells the operator his mom is unresponsive.
Is she breathing? Get on and get some help out there for you.
When the operator asks Trenton if someone can perform CPR in the meantime, he passes the phone to his uncle.
The dispatcher immediately begins instructing him to resuscitate Bradina.
But Carl soon realizes there may be no point.
When he got closer and he felt her, Bradina was cold.
I think she's doing.
You think she's beyond help?
Yes.
They were too late. Trenton had lost his mother.
"33-year-old Brandy Henson had built a beautiful life in Essex, Maryland, with her son Trenton and her longtime boyfriend, Tavon Howard.
They were a family, if you will. He was in her son's life.
But now, after her brother has told the 911 operator he believes his sister is dead,
I think she's doing.
medics have arrived on the scene.
They find Bradina lying on the bed, her legs hanging over, face up.
They came to see if they could revive her, but they couldn't.
While waiting for detectives to arrive, responding officers began surveying the evidence.
Bradina was discovered face up on her bed, which indicates whoever her attacker was, she was face to face with them.
After examining the victim a little more closely, police quickly identify how she died.
The cause of death was gunshot wounds.
Oh, that's one.
Yeah.
And then the neck.
They found 3 gunshot wounds, one in her chest, one in her neck, and one in her right cheek.
Is that one in the face? That's pretty.
There was blood spatter everywhere.
And detectives found 45 caliber casings around the room.
Have one round here, with casing here,
Uh-huh.
right? And then 2 of them.
A discovery under the victim's pillow is also telling.
They recovered her handgun that she legally owned and was registered to her. It was not fired, it was unused.
So either she couldn't get to the gun or whoever was there with her who attacked her diffused the situation enough that she didn't feel like having the gun was an urgent situation.
And while police have no idea why Brandy was killed, they quickly rule out one motive.
We knew it wasn't a robbery or a burglary.
There was within eyesight of her body many valuable materials such as smartwatch, phone, wallet full of money, the laptop.
Moving downstairs, officers find groceries and serving trays on the kitchen counter.
It appeared Bradina was preparing to cook.
And while the front door was open when police arrived, it remains intact.
The front door had no signs of forced entry.
But the back door raises eyebrows.
It was barricaded.
There was a piece of wood wedged under the door handle and the floor.
And when they looked on the outside, they noticed a footprint on the door.
As if it had been attempted to be kicked in.
The barricaded door, along with the gun under the victim's pillow, suggests this attack may not have been entirely unexpected.
Whatever happened to Bradina Henson, this was personal.
Outside, officers join Brandy's brother and her son, who were sitting in his uncle's car, for questioning.
Establishing a timeline was most important, so we need to talk to family about who talked to her last.
So tell me about why you came today to check on her. Have you not heard from her?
Trenton was staying with his Uncle Carl.
Trenton had talked to his mom on Tuesday night and finalized plans to come back home the next day.
But Bradina didn't show up to pick Trenton up.
And she wasn't answering her phone.
Is it strange?
They knew then something may have been wrong. It was enough for Carl to say, Trenton, let's go see about your mom.
Brandy's son further explains that when they got to the home, they had immediate cause for concern.
Check the door.
The door was shut, but unlocked.
This was troubling in the fact that Bradina always closed and locked the door.
So her son and brother entered the home.
You walked in, then you went up right upstairs, and you called out a little bit?
We walked there, we called out.
But the young boy never anticipated the horrific scene he and his uncle would find upstairs.
His life changed forever.
I can't imagine what he went through, finding your mother like that in the condition that she was in.
When police asked Carl and Trenton if there was anyone who might have wanted to harm Brandy, her brother draws a blank.
Carl could not think of anybody.
But Brandy's son immediately mentions a possible suspect.
Her ex-boyfriend? Okay.
They had, in fact, recently broken up.
But he had been coming around, even though his mother had asked him not to. Tavon just was not taking no for an answer.
The 13-year-old son of murder victim Bradina Henson has just told Baltimore police that his mother recently broke up with her boyfriend, Tavon Howard. But Trenton claims since the breakup, Tavon refused to leave his mother alone.
Despite them being broken up in the last few weeks, he had been coming around.
He was not going to accept that this was over.
And her son details a highly disturbing incident that occurred just weeks before his mother's killing.
Tavon had entered the home in a fit of rage and used a knife to slice their couch open, and also took a gun and shot bullet holes into her bed.
You know if she called the police?
But before they can get any further, a hysterical woman arrives on the scene.
Let me talk to somebody.
Do you want to talk to a police officer? Okay, I'll talk to you. Come over here.
The woman identifies herself as Dana Dillon and calls Bradina her daughter.
So you're her mother. Is your daughter?
The officer is patient as Dana struggles to get her words out.
She had some problems with
him.
God.
Okay. Who is this guy? Take a deep breath. Yeah, sure. Take a deep breath.
Tavon Howard.
Like Bradina's son, she tells police Tavon and his mom had broken up, and Tavon had been causing some problems.
Upon hearing this name for a second time, police believe Tavon is their prime suspect.
You want to know what the best thing you can do for her right now is? And I mean this honestly. If you want us to find out what happened to get to the bottom of it, I need you to go talk to the detective.
Her family is taken to police headquarters for questioning.
In the meantime, some officers remain behind to canvass the neighborhood.
So, unfortunately, the neighbor next door passed away. I was wondering if you guys heard anything suspicious over the past 2 days.
Who passed away?
The neighbor is stunned because she had just crossed paths with Brandy on Tuesday night.
Around what time?
I think around 8 p.m. She was coming. She had to go streets. And I was asking if she needed help. And she said no.
Bradina said, "Oh, I got it. I'm good." She was looking to prepare Easter dinner.
After that, the neighbor doesn't think Brandy ever left the house again.
The neighbor had noticed that Brandy's car hadn't moved since she saw her.
But she reveals that in the early hours of Wednesday morning, a loud bang coming from Brandy's home woke her.
You know what time that was?
In the middle of the night.
Okay.
Maybe around 2 3.
But when she got up to investigate, she didn't see anyone, and she didn't hear anything else. So she left it alone and she went back to bed.
Officers suspect this was when Brandy's assailant attacked her.
A neighbor hearing the bang late at night was very important to set the timeline.
With the canvass complete, officers head to the building management office where they request surveillance footage.
Management confirms to the police officers that they do have surveillance cameras.
In fact, there was a camera pointed right at Bradina's apartment.
But there's something else the building manager thinks police need to know about Brandy and her apartment.
There was a lot of calls that came in for maintenance about damage to the property.
And this isn't the first time someone broke into the home.
She revealed that there was an incident.
Her back door was kicked in, and then she came to the office to put in a service request.
When the manager asked Brandy if she knew who might be responsible, she claimed she didn't.
But she could tell Bradina wasn't being entirely honest.
After pressing further, Brandy finally came clean.
She finally admitted it was her ex-boyfriend. Bradina was in fear for her life.
Brandy Henson's apartment building manager has just informed police that her ex-boyfriend had broken into her apartment weeks before her murder.
He had kicked in the back door.
Because of him, the back door was barricaded.
And while she didn't tell the manager her ex's name, Brandy soon made it clear how terrified she was of him.
She had told her that she called the police to get help, but government help may have been a little bit more consequential than she wanted, and she tried to handle it all on her own.
So she decided to ask the leasing company to be let out of her lease early. She did not want to live there where he had access to her.
At the station, a detective meets with Brandy's son, Trenton, now joined by his father, Darnell Short.
I'm Detective Needham. I'm going to talk to you for, I think, a few minutes and get you guys on your way, all right?
At the request of the detective, Brandy's son fills him in on what he's already told police.
Last time I actually talked to her was Tuesday.
He also takes this opportunity to see what Trenton's father might know.
Did she express anything to you about anything that's going on or concerned about anything?
He says they really kept it to being about Trenton anytime they interacted.
But police need to be certain Darnell had nothing to do with Brandy's murder.
They press him just to see if he has any jealousy, if he has any envy, if he still wants to be with Brandy.
Are you aware of any romantic involvement she has, boyfriends or ex-boyfriends? Or
No, I can't.
is that your thing?
Yeah, no, I just kept myself. You know what I'm saying?
He doesn't know anything about her personal life.
Even though their relationship didn't work out, he was fine with that. They had both moved on.
I got you. That's a good thing.
At the same time, another detective meets with Dana Dillon, the woman who'd raised Brandy.
She is beyond devastated and distraught.
Her family lost someone they loved.
Once again, Dana insists Tavon is to blame.
He kept my baby. He did. I know he did.
Dana explains that while Brandy was initially very much in love with him, the family always knew Tavon was trouble.
This was a man that was in and out of prison constantly.
He was a drug dealer, had access to firearms.
He had violent tendencies. His temper was horrible.
This boy is crazy. This boy is crazy.
They had a very tumultuous relationship.
Has he ever physically assaulted her before they?
Yeah.
But Brandy's aunt explains that over their 10-year relationship, Brandy forgave Tavon again and again.
Every single time he got out of prison, Bradina was right there to help him get back on track.
She took care of his medical appointments. She took care of his financial needs. She gave him a place to live. Bradina was a helper, and she wanted to maybe rescue him.
But her aunt says finally, a few months earlier, Brandy decided enough was enough.
She finally put her foot down and said no, that she was not going to get back with him, and that she did not want to be with him.
Like Brandy's son, Dana recalls the chilling moment when Tavon destroyed Brandy's couch.
Ever since the tearing up the furniture and shooting bullets, I've been walking around with my head on a swivel.
But that was far from the only way Tavon tormented Brandy in the weeks leading up to the murder.
Everywhere Brandy went, Tavon would show.
She was a threat to her, because she recently told me he spit on her.
This was a man that was trying to prey upon her and instill fear.
She had told people that if she wound up dead, he was likely to be the person that did it.
And Dana says Tavon's unhinged behavior pushed Brandy to take precautions she normally wouldn't.
She had a gun.
Okay.
So I never seen it, but she told me that she had one.
She was in so much fear due to his continued violence against her that she herself applied for a handgun, a 9mm, and she kept it under her pillow as a means of protection.
Bradina is thinking maybe she was going to take out a restraining order on Tavon.
Before ending the interview, the detective asks Dana if there's anyone else who might want to hurt Brandy.
There's nobody else that she was having any issue with. This boy did this.
Next, investigators confirm Tavon's long criminal record.
He had a very long rap sheet of drug-related crimes, but also some violence.
And some of those charges included weapons and violent assault of other people.
And Tavon had been charged with murder previously.
But those charges were dropped.
But since getting out of jail a year ago, it looks like Tavon has kept his record clean, except for one small blemish.
Investigators saw a traffic stop involving a white vehicle.
The white SUV was actually registered to somebody else and had very distinctive damage to the front of the car. They made a note, but they sent him on his way with a ticket.
But this seemingly innocent encounter will soon cost Tavon when detectives review the surveillance footage from Brandy's building.
They see a white SUV with very distinct damage to the front of the car pull up to Bradina's home at around 1:30 a.m. the night that she was murdered.
Reviewing surveillance footage from Brandy Henson's building in the hours leading up to her murder, Essex detectives see an SUV matching one her ex-boyfriend, Tavon Howard, is known to drive.
This white SUV has significant damage to its front bumper.
While they are all but certain the driver who gets out and walks up to Brandy's door is Tavon, they can't confirm it.
The footage was a bit grainy, so they could not make out a clear face.
Investigators also note a second person inside the vehicle.
Once this figure that they believe is Tavon leaves the car, they see the passenger open the door, toss a bottle out, and close the door back.
About an hour after the driver entered Brandy's residence, they see him return to the car.
This time, this person is wearing a ski mask.
They see him speed off.
Immediately, investigators put out a bolo for the vehicle Tavon is suspected to be driving.
They knew the SUV's license plate.
It doesn't take long for Baltimore City Police to spot the SUV.
Officers initiate the traffic stop, but Tavon takes off, leading officers on a chase.
Police continue their pursuit and call in a helicopter to follow him.
Interstate still be going westbound O'Donnell. Westbound O'Donnell crossing Ponca. So you're gonna get orders.
He was driving as fast and as reckless as he wanted to.
At a turn, the vehicle finally slows.
The driver actually stops the vehicle, and his passenger jumps out.
Officers quickly chase the second man down and place him under arrest.
They identify him as a 20-year-old named Jamal.
Meanwhile, the SUV's wild flight continues.
Just jumped over the left-hand turn lane at Gus Ryan, and he's making a left southbound.
Ultimately, he hit a vehicle that just happened to be pulling out.
When the perpetrator runs from the vehicle, there's no longer any doubt it's Tavon Howard.
He was ultimately detained by Baltimore City Police.
Claiming injuries, Tavon is transported to a nearby hospital. Back at the station, police meet with Tavon's passenger, Jamal Flynn, who claims to have no idea why he's there.
He tells police they got in the car to get some lunch.
Yeah.
He had no idea that Tavon was going to take off like that.
When asked how he knows Tavon, Jamal says they've known each other most of their lives.
And the two, in fact, sell drugs together.
Nonetheless, Jamal claims he's completely in the dark about Tavon's personal life.
We'll talk about times, bro.
And while he does admit Tavon gave him a ride home Tuesday night, he denies ever leaving Baltimore City for the suburbs.
When do you guys go out to Essex?
I didn't go out to Essex.
That's when the investigator pulls out Brandy's photo.
Ever seen anybody talking about her? Picture with her?
I lived a day in my life.
Detectives continue to press him.
Unfortunately, Brandy got murdered the other night.
What?
Yep. That's why I'm in here talking to you.
Even after being shown pictures of Brandy's building, Jamal continues to claim his innocence.
He tells police that he was not there the night of the murder.
So the detective confronts him with the evidence.
It's on video, and I'm not trying to screw you. You're screwing yourself. Just be honest.
Under pressure, Jamal changes his story.
He tells investigators, okay, you're right, I was with Tavon in the car.
I went to sleep in the car. I woke up, I didn't know where I was. I had to pee. I peed in the bottle. I tried it out the door. And then I went back to sleep, bro.
But Jamal now admits that a little while later, Tavon woke him up.
He was banging on the window, asking him to open the door.
It's me, I was on.
What kind of mask?
I'm scared.
He also noticed Tavon has a gun in his pocket.
Did you assume something bad happened then?
And Jamal says he only grew more anxious as Tavon drove out of the complex.
Was he driving slow at first, fast?
But Jamal says he avoided asking any questions.
He said it wasn't his business.
After listening to Jamal's story, the detective levels with him one last time.
Listen, I'm gonna ask you this one time only. He tell you what he was going there to do?
No, sir. No. Never told me what he was going to do.
Luckily for Jamal, the detective believes him.
He ultimately was released without being charged.
When detectives scour Tavon's vehicle, the evidence against him continues to mount.
They found a .45 caliber pistol with ammunition. The same .45 caliber ammunition that was found at Brandy's home.
Investigators also find a ski mask.
And the case against Tavon is about to become airtight.
Investigators secure warrants for Tavon's cell phone records.
At approximately the same time of the video of him pulling up, his phone connected to Berdina's Wi-Fi.
It really is such a nail in his coffin.
Essex detectives investigating the murder of Brandy Henson have just confirmed that her ex-boyfriend, Tavon Howard, was in her apartment moments before she was murdered.
Tavon's phone synced to Brandy's Wi-Fi right at the time she was murdered, placing Tavon at the scene of the crime.
Now cleared at the hospital, Tavon is transferred to the police station for questioning.
You wearing a mask because you're sick or because you don't want to get sick?
I'm wearing a mask and they told me to put the mask on when you come in the building.
Oh, really? I don't know. Whatever works.
The detective begins the interview by asking Tavon if he knows why he's there.
Man, I might have a couple ideas.
He said he already knew that Berdina was dead because her son had told him.
And Tavon believes that Brandy's family does not like him and are saying that due to his criminal history, he's responsible for her murder.
I would even expect if they came in here and told you a whole bunch of lies.
But he insists he had nothing to do with her murder.
Tavon admits that he and Berdina had issues, but he maintains he would never hurt her.
Do you think that she would eventually come around and you guys got back together?
I think that we probably definitely would have got back together.
And although he does admit to being in the area of Brandy's home the night of the crime, he claims he never saw her.
He said he was in fact there to just sell drugs.
I had a weed sale and a crack sale.
As for why Tavon fled from police, he's also ready with an answer.
I had drugs in there, which is why I ran.
Okay.
But when asked who might have been the one to harm Brandy, Tavon makes an outrageous claim.
One day, where we took each other home, and I find out that she was having sex for money.
Tavon is claiming the other men were possibly to blame.
Finally, police confront Tavon with the evidence against him.
See those two things?
Cameras.
Cameras.
Okay.
You're gonna have a hard time getting anybody to believe what you're saying now, because I'm gonna show these videos. I'm gonna show the gun that I take out of your car and how it matches the bullets that I took out of her. I'm gonna show your fingerprints and DNA on it.
But Tavon refuses to admit any wrongdoing.
I ain't do nothing to you.
Say it again?
Said I didn't do nothing to Bradina.
He could have told the truth, and he decided not to.
But even without a confession, investigators still have more than enough to move forward with the case against Tavon.
Hopefully you could get charged with first-degree murder, okay?
When Tavon's trial opens in June of 2023, Brandy's family is there to support her.
They were there the whole case, and they wanted to see the story to a conclusion.
To prosecutors, Tavon's motive was simple.
He took her life for no other reason than she didn't want him. And he could not deal with that.
He figured that if I can't have you, no one else can. So he executed her.
Prosecutors believe that on the night of the murder, Tavon made one last-ditch effort to change Bradina's mind.
Bradina had broken up with him several times, and when this happened, they were broken up. But she opened the door for him anyway.
Once he entered the home, obviously Bradina is at the mercy of a very angry and violent person, and things took a very dark turn.
Somehow they ended up in Brandy's bedroom.
Possibly Bradina tried to get to her bedroom because she knew that gun was under her pillow. And this could be a case where she tried to defend herself.
But Brandy never got the chance.
That's where he pulled out the pistol and shot her at least 3 times.
The case against Tavon is strong.
There was videos, there was the high-speed car chase, there was the cell phone data.
Through it all, Tavon sticks to his original story.
Tavon said he was innocent.
But the jury sees right through him.
Mr. Howard is found guilty of first-degree murder.
When the judge sentences him to life in prison, Brandy's family is grateful.
They were crying. All the family members were hugging.
A cold-blooded killer is behind bars for the rest of his life where he belongs.
I'm glad that there was some justice done in this case.
Although there were many victims in this case, Brandy's young son may be the one who suffered the most.
He will forever have that memory of his mother discovering her dead inside their home. The trauma that's associated with going through a murder trial and then having to grow up without his mother.
A wonderful woman who will never be forgotten.
Bradina really cared about her community, and people really cared about her. There was Instagram posts at the time, thousands of people commenting about how kind she was. She was a good person.
And Tavon took advantage of her kindness.
What's sad is that Bradina knew that this was a bad relationship, but ultimately she gave him a second chance. She opened the door for him the day of the murder. That was her biggest mistake.
In cases of domestic violence, it's important to be decisive and move quickly.
You really have to think about yourself first. If you need help or you need resources, it's out there for you.
You don't want to be the next Bradina, and unfortunately it happens way too often.
When we think of paradise, our minds often drift to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We imagine endless stretches of golden sand, water so blue it defies logic, and warm trade winds moving gently through emerald canopies. Kauai, the oldest of the main Hawaiian islands, is the very embodiment of this global fantasy. It is an island of profound, staggering beauty, characterized by its dramatic cliffs, deep canyons, and lush rainforests. In the year 2000, it was a place where time seemed to move at its own deliberate, unhurried pace. With a population resting at just around 56,000 residents, Kauai was not just a destination for vacationers, it was a deeply interconnected, fiercely loyal community. It was a place where generations of families lived side by side, where neighbors knew not just your name, but your history, your parents, and your grandparents. In a community this small, surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean, there is an inherent, deeply ingrained sense of safety. You are physically and psychologically insulated from the chaos of the mainland. The violent crimes of the sprawling continents are not supposed to reach these shores. Doors were often left unlocked. Children played outside until the streetlights came on. But absolute safety is often the most dangerous illusion of all, and paradise is just as vulnerable to the darkness of the human heart as anywhere else on Earth. To understand what happened in the spring and summer of that year, you first have to understand the physical landscape of the island, particularly its western edge. While the north and east shores of Kauai are famous for lush, rainy valleys and bustling resorts catering to honeymooners, the west side is a completely different world entirely. It is the leeward side of the island, shielded from the heavy tropical rains by the towering central mountains. Because of this geographic phenomenon, the west side is significantly drier, hotter, and vastly more rugged. It is here that you find historic plantation towns like Waimea and Keikaha, quiet outposts where the pace of life slows even further, and the air is heavy with the scent of red dirt and the ocean. Moving beyond these towns, the population density drops dramatically. The landscape opens up into vast, sun-baked expanses of agricultural land, rugged coastline, and deep, quiet valleys. There is a distinct, almost overwhelming sense of isolation on the western edge of Kauai. If you take the highway past Keikaha, you eventually run out of pavement. The road turns to a powdery red dirt, leading toward Polihale State Park. This is a massive, remote stretch of wild, unpredictable beach flanked by the sheer, towering cliffs of the Na Pali coast. The road to Polihale is notorious among locals, a long, deeply rutted, punishing path through fields of sugar cane and dry, unforgiving brush. It is a place you only go if you intend to be far away from the rest of the world. There are no neighborhoods out here. There are no streetlights to guide your way at night, no corner stores, and no heavy flow of passing traffic. It is profoundly beautiful, but it is also profoundly desolate. The exact same can be said for areas around Pakala, another quiet, uncrowded expanse along the southwestern shore, known mostly to local surfers. These are places of intense solitude. For decades, residents and visitors alike sought out this solitude for surfing, fishing, or simply finding a quiet moment away from the relentless hum of humanity. But that very solitude, that vast and beautiful emptiness, holds a terrifying dual nature. A place where you can go to be completely alone is also a place where you can be easily overpowered, silenced, and made to disappear without a trace. In the year 2000, the ancient peace of this western expanse was completely shattered. A shadow fell over the sunlit beaches and the quiet dirt roads, bringing with it a reality that the island community was entirely unprepared to face. As the warm, breezy months of spring transitioned into the oppressive, humid heat of summer, a terrifying, unmistakable pattern began to weave its way through the tight-knit fabric of Kauai. It was not a sudden, chaotic explosion of violence, but a creeping, methodical menace that targeted the most vulnerable members of the population. Law enforcement officers, accustomed to dealing with the standard, predictable offenses of a small island population, property disputes, minor thefts, traffic violations, suddenly found themselves staring into a terrifying abyss. They were no longer dealing with crimes of passion or simple opportunistic violence. They were watching the deliberate, calculated work of a predator. The pattern of the attacks was highly specific and deeply alarming to investigators who recognized the signs of a serial offender. The victims were exclusively women. Furthermore, they were women who were entirely alone at the time of the attacks. They were found in these exact stretches of isolated, Western geography, the very places where the island's natural beauty provides a thick, impenetrable curtain of privacy. The sheer scale of the Western terrain meant that whoever was responsible for these horrific acts knew exactly what they were doing and where they were going. They were not striking in the crowded tourist hubs of Poipu or the busy commercial streets of Lihu. They were hunting in the quiet, forgotten corners of Keikaha, the remote, wave-battered stretches near Pakala, and the desolate dirt paths leading toward Polihale. They were operating in the blind spots of paradise. The attacker was utilizing the extreme isolation of the environment as his primary accomplice. If you scream on the dirt road to Polihale, the sound is simply swallowed by the crashing waves and the vast, empty agricultural fields. There is no one around to hear you. There is no one to look out a living room window and dial the police for help. The perpetrator understood this perfectly, navigating the terrain with a chilling level of comfort. The violence inflicted upon these women was not accidental, and it was not swift. It was a terrifying escalation of brutality that sent a primal, paralyzing shockwave through the entire island. The community slowly began to realize that the women of Kauai were being actively hunted. The modus operandi of the attacker was consistent and horrifying in its execution. He approached women who were isolated in these remote areas. Once he made his move, the violence was absolute and devastating. There were elements of severe blunt force trauma, indicating a rage and a physical dominance that left the victims terribly broken. There were horrific sexual assaults, violating the victims in the most intimate and traumatic ways conceivable. And most chillingly, connecting all the agonizing data points together, there was the consistent presence of a knife. The blade became the unmistakable signature of a ghost who was stalking the western shores of the island. The toll of that spring and summer is etched permanently into the history of Kauai. It is a grim, heartbreaking tally that shattered the illusion of paradise forever. One woman was murdered, her life taken in a brutal, lonely struggle, her body left in the quiet desolation of the west side, discarded like an afterthought in a drainage ditch. Then, a miracle occurred amid the suffocating darkness. Another woman was attacked with the same terrifying ferocity, subjected to the same horrific sequence of physical and sexual violence, but she defied the odds. Through an incredible, unimaginable exertion of human will and raw survival instinct, she lived. She survived to look her attacker in the eye, to memorize his features, and to endure an agonizing crawl toward help. The island held its collective breath, hoping this brave survivor's courage would be the key to ending the nightmare and putting the monster behind bars. But the darkness was not finished with Kauai. Before the summer was over, another woman was found murdered, her life extinguished with an even more terrifying level of brutality, her injuries speaking to a killer who was growing more violent and more confident in his isolation. 3 women, 3 horrific attacks. A geographic cluster that pointed an unyielding finger at a single, terrifying conclusion. In a city of millions, a killer can hide in the sheer volume of humanity. But on an island of 56,000, anonymity is almost impossible. The realization that the killer was likely someone who shopped at the same grocery stores, drove the same 2-lane highways, and perhaps even smiled at law enforcement officers, created an atmosphere of suffocating paranoia. The phrase itself is something no community ever wants to hear, let alone a small island in the Pacific. Serial killer. It implies a level of cold, calculated malice that is difficult for the human mind to process. But as the bodies were discovered, and as the survivor recounted her agonizing ordeal, the police could no longer avoid the grim reality of what they were facing. They were not dealing with isolated incidents or unrelated tragedies. They were hunting a single entity, a man who viewed the secluded beaches and quiet roads of West Kauai as his personal hunting ground. What makes this story so profoundly haunting is not a lack of evidence. In many cold cases, investigators are left with nothing but whispers and rumors, grasping at thin air in the hopes of finding a single thread to pull. But the West Kauai cases were entirely different. The police had a physical description. They had the harrowing, first-hand account of a woman who had fought for her life and lived to tell the tale. They had a composite sketch of his face, a drawing that was broadcast to a terrified public in the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would recognize those features. More importantly, they had the holy grail of modern forensic science. They had biological evidence left at the scenes. They had the killer's DNA. With a survivor's description, a facial sketch, and biological evidence, a case is supposed to be solved. The justice system is designed to take these scientific and testimonial pieces, put them together, and produce a name, a conviction, and ultimately, a sense of closure for the families. But the story of the Kauai serial killer is a devastating lesson in the terrifying unpredictability of the real world. Despite having the fundamental building blocks of a solved case, the phantom remained nameless. The DNA, a silent witness to the atrocities committed on those lonely dirt roads, failed to unlock the definitive identity of the monster. The composite sketch stared out from newspapers and television screens, looking into the eyes of 56,000 island residents, yet it sparked no definitive revelation. No indisputable tip came in. No neighbor, friend, or family member stepped forward to shatter the perpetrator's anonymity. And so, a deep, pervasive fear settled permanently into the red dirt of the West Side. The women of Kauai learned to look over their shoulders. The unwritten rules of island life were rewritten overnight. You did not walk alone near the cane fields. You did not linger at the isolated beaches as the sun began to set. The pristine paradise they knew had been irrevocably stained by violence. We are left to examine the wreckage of that terrible year. We are left to retrace the steps of the victims, to walk the desolate paths where they met the darkest aspects of humanity. This is an exploration of how a monster can leave behind a survivor, leave behind his genetic code, and yet, decades later, remain nothing more than a lethal, terrifying phantom haunting the fringes of paradise. To comprehend the terrifying reality of what transpired on the western shores of Kauai in the year 2000, one must first understand the profound duality of the island's geography. There is the Kauai that the world sees in glossy travel brochures, defined by the emerald spires of the Napali coast and the manicured resorts of the South Shore. And then there is the Kauai where working families live, where the tourists fade away, and where the landscape takes on a rugged, isolated, and almost imposing character. The western side of the island is characterized by sweeping agricultural plains, deep red dirt that stains everything it touches, and a coastline that feels less like a tropical playground and more like the edge of the earth. Towns like Hanapepe, Kekaha, and Waimea serve as the final outposts of civilization before the land surrenders to vast, wild expanses of brush, sugarcane fields, and plunging ocean cliffs. In these tight-knit communities, generations of families have built quiet, peaceful lives, deeply connected to the rhythm of the ocean and the land. But beyond the town limits, the geography shifts into a profound emptiness. The roads stretching out toward places like Polihale State Park and Pakala Point are not bustling thoroughfares. They are long, punishing stretches of dirt and cracked asphalt, cutting through desolate landscapes where a person can travel for miles without seeing another soul or passing a single dwelling. This extreme isolation is cherished by locals seeking a quiet place to fish, surf, or simply exist in nature without the intrusion of the modern world. Yet, this very same isolation creates a terrifying vulnerability, a vast theater of emptiness where a predator can operate with near total impunity, shielded by the sheer scale of the unpopulated terrain. It was within this beautiful but unforgiving landscape that three distinct women, each moving through their own entirely ordinary lives, were forced into an unimaginable intersection with a violent predator who understood how to use the geography of paradise as a weapon. The terrifying sequence of events began with a woman named Lisa Bissell. She was 38 years old, a resident of the quiet, historic town of Hanapepe, often affectionately known among locals as the biggest little town on Kauai. Hanapepe is a place of charming plantation-style buildings, art galleries, and a swinging bridge that crosses the slow-moving river, a town where the pace of life is famously gentle and community bonds are strong. Lisa was simply living her life within this peaceful enclave, navigating the daily routines that define human existence. To those who knew her, she was a familiar presence, a part of the local fabric. April 7th of the year 2000 began like any other day in this sun-drenched, easygoing community. There was nothing in the air, no atmospheric shift or sudden omen, to suggest that the day would end in an unprecedented nightmare. The most haunting aspect of Lisa Bissell's story is the devastating void of information surrounding her final hours. She began her day immersed in the normalcy of island life, but at some point as the sun began to lower and the shadows stretched across the red dirt, she found herself away from the safety of Hanapepe and out in the desolate stretches of the Western geography. The precise circumstances that led her out of town remain locked away in the terrible silence of that day. We do not know if she was seeking a moment of quiet reflection near the ocean, if she was simply passing through, or if she was lured into the emptiness by a deceptive encounter. What we do know is that her journey ended in the worst conceivable way, in a remote location where her cries for help would be swallowed entirely by the wind and the crashing waves, completely isolated from anyone who could have offered protection. Lisa, at 38 years old, with her own hopes, struggles, and connections to the community, was suddenly and violently erased from the world, becoming the first tragic victim of a shadowy figure who was only just beginning his reign of terror. As the island community struggled to comprehend the horrific discovery of Lisa Bissell, a false sense of temporary calm settled over the western towns, a desperate hope that perhaps this was a terrible, isolated tragedy rather than the beginning of a pattern. That hope was brutally extinguished roughly 6 weeks later in the town of Keikaha, the westernmost municipality in the United States, a quiet, sun-baked community where neighbors are accustomed to waving at one another from their porches. On May 22nd, or perhaps rolling into the 23rd, a 52-year-old woman was occupying herself with the most mundane, peaceful activity imaginable. She was doing yard work at her own home. She was not wandering a desolate beach in the dead of night, nor was she exploring the remote, unlit dirt roads leading out of town. She was in her own sanctuary, tending to her property in the daylight or early evening, existing in a space where every human being expects and deserves absolute safety. The sanctity of one's own home is a fundamental psychological anchor, and for a resident of Keikaha, the threat of extreme violence arriving in your own backyard was simply unfathomable. This woman, whose name has been shielded from the public out of respect for her privacy and her profound trauma, was 52 years old, grounded in her community, and going about the deeply ordinary tasks of maintaining her home. She was in a place of domestic tranquility when the boundary between safety and absolute terror was breached. The approach was not immediately violent, which makes it all the more chilling. It was disguised as a mundane, almost pathetic interaction, a calculated manipulation of the island's deeply ingrained culture of hospitality and kindness. This 52-year-old woman, simply trying to manage her garden, was forced into a brutal fight for her survival on the very land where she had built her life, fundamentally shattering the illusion that the walls of a home or the borders of a quiet town could offer any real protection from the predator lurking on the west side. Despite the miraculous survival of the second victim, the shadow over Kauai did not lift. Instead, it deepened into a suffocating darkness by the late summer of that year. The final known victim in this horrific sequence was a woman named Darren Singer. For many years, various contemporary news reports incorrectly listed her age, but the official Kauai County cold case files unequivocally established that Darren was 43 years old at the time of her murder. She was not a permanent resident of the West Side, but rather a visitor from the neighboring island of Maui. Darren had traveled to Kauai seeking the very things that draw so many people to the Hawaiian Islands: peace, natural beauty, and a deep, restorative connection with the outdoors. By the end of August, her journey led her to a remote campsite near Pakala Point Beach. Pakala is an area renowned among surfers for its beautiful, rolling waves, but it is also exceptionally isolated, bordered by thick vegetation, and lying far from the main highway or any densely populated neighborhoods. For someone seeking tranquility, camping near Pakala Point offers a profound communion with nature, a place to fall asleep to the rhythm of the ocean under a canopy of stars. Darren Singer, 43 years old and seeking nothing but peace, set up her camp in this beautiful, desolate stretch of the western shore. Like Lisa Bissell, Darren was a woman alone in a secluded environment, unwittingly matching the exact profile that the killer was actively hunting. She came to Kauai for the beauty of the outdoors, trusting the serene environment to offer a safe haven, completely unaware that the isolation she sought was exactly what the predator required to operate. Darren was a woman with a life on another island, a woman with family and friends who loved her, a woman whose quest for a peaceful retreat ended in a nightmare of unspeakable violence in the remote brush near the ocean. To fully grasp the magnitude of this tragedy, we must dwell on the devastating contrast between the idyllic setting and the horrific reality of the crimes. Imagine the sensory experience of a late afternoon in Hanapepe or Kekaha. The air is warm and heavy, carrying the distinct scent of salt water and blooming plumeria. The sound of feral chickens scratching in the dirt and the distant, rhythmic crash of the Pacific Ocean create a soundtrack of absolute tranquility. This is the environment that Lisa Bissell woke up to on April 7th. She moved through a world that, by all outward appearances, was incredibly safe and intensely familiar. The transition from that warm, deeply rooted sense of security to the stark, terrifying isolation of the ditch near Polihale is a psychological plunge into complete darkness. We are forced to consider the profound terror she must have felt as the vast, empty landscape of the West Side, a landscape she likely knew well, suddenly transformed into a trap from which there was no possibility of escape. Her life, filled with the everyday complexities and joys of being 38 years old on Kauai, was violently interrupted, leaving a permanent void in the community and an agonizing trail of unanswered questions about her final moments. Similarly, the ordeal of the 52-year-old survivor forces us to confront the vulnerability of our own personal spaces. When you are in your yard in Kekaha, you are surrounded by the subtle, comforting markers of domestic life. A garden hose coiled on the grass, the sound of a neighbor's television drifting through an open window, the familiar texture of the soil under your hands. It is a space where your guard is completely lowered. The psychological trauma of having that specific, safe environment violated by a predator is almost impossible to quantify. The survivor was not engaging in high-risk behavior. She was simply existing in her own domain. Her survival is a testament to an unimaginable inner strength, a refusal to be extinguished even when confronted by a sudden, overwhelming force of violence in the place where she should have been most secure. Her ability to endure and to memorize the details of her attacker provided the only fragile beacon of hope in an otherwise entirely dark narrative. And then there is Darren Singer, 43 years old, whose story brings a different but equally heartbreaking dimension to the tragedy. Darren represents the inherent trust that so many place in the natural world. She traveled from Maui to Kauai, navigating from one island to another in search of the profound, spiritual peace that sleeping near the ocean provides. Pakala Point is a place of raw, unpolished beauty, a location that demands a certain level of respect for the environment. Darren pitched her camp believing that the greatest threats she might face were the elements themselves, perhaps a sudden rain shower or a strong gust of wind coming off the water. The brutal reality that a human predator was stalking the very shore she sought out for sanctuary is a devastating betrayal of that trust. The isolation of Pakala Point, which Darren undoubtedly viewed as a precious commodity, became the very tool used to ensure her destruction. The roads leading to Polihale and Pakala are no longer just pathways to natural beauty. They are memorials, haunted corridors forever marked by the violence that occurred there in the year 2000. The vast, red dirt plains and the deep, silent valleys of West Kauai hold the echoes of these three women. Lisa, the 38-year-old local whose final journey remains a mystery. The 52-year-old homeowner who fought a monster in her own yard and lived to describe his face. Darren, the 43-year-old visitor whose quest for a quiet night under the stars ended in an unspeakable tragedy. They were all individuals with rich, complex lives, reduced by a shadowy killer to victims in a terrifying pattern. To understand the Kauai serial killer case, we must always keep the humanity of Lisa, the brave survivor, and Darren at the absolute forefront of our minds, recognizing that the true horror of this story lies not just in the actions of the killer, but in the profound, irreplaceable loss of the beautiful lives he chose to destroy. The transformation of Western Kauai from a peaceful sanctuary into a hunting ground was marked by a timeline of escalating, visceral horror. The reality of the violence, laid bare in police reports and autopsy findings, presents a chronological descent into absolute darkness. This sequence of terror began in the early days of April, specifically on the 7th of the month in the year 2000, when the illusion of island safety was permanently shattered by the discovery of 38-year-old Lisa Bissell. Her lifeless body was located in a grim, secluded drainage ditch adjacent to a dirt road leading toward the vast isolation of Polihale. The location itself was a crucial piece of the investigative puzzle. It was a dumping ground chosen specifically for its desolation, a place far removed from heavy traffic, commercial districts, or residential neighborhoods, guaranteeing that the perpetrator could operate without the fear of interruption or observation. The official records held by Kauai County confirm a staggering level of brutality inflicted upon Lisa in her final moments. She did not merely cross paths with a murderer, she encountered a predator intent on absolute destruction. The contemporary reports detailed a horrifying sequence of events, confirming that Lisa had been subjected to a violent sexual assault, brutally beaten, and ultimately killed by multiple stab wounds. The presence of the knife, coupled with the profound blunt force trauma and the sexual violation, established a horrifying baseline of violence. The killer had overpowered her completely, utilizing the extreme isolation of the Western landscape to ensure her cries for help would go entirely unheard. The discovery of Lisa Bissell's body sent a tremor of deep, unsettling fear through the island. Yet at that specific moment in time, law enforcement and the community alike still clung to the desperate hope that this was an isolated, albeit monstrous, aberration. That fragile hope was completely eradicated approximately 6 weeks later, plunging the island into a state of full-blown terror. Between the 22nd and 23rd of May, the predator struck again, this time breaching the fundamental sanctity of a private residence in the town of Keikaha. A 52-year-old woman was working quietly in her yard, completely unaware that she had been selected as the next target in a terrifying sequence. The manner in which the attacker initiated contact is perhaps the most chilling aspect of this particular ordeal. He did not lunge from the shadows or break down a door with sudden, overwhelming force. Instead, he utilized a calculated, non-threatening ruse designed specifically to bypass the natural defenses of a compassionate individual. He approached the woman and introduced himself, giving the name John and stating that he was homeless and in need of assistance. This was a psychological masterstroke by the predator, manipulating the inherent kindness and hospitality deeply woven into the culture of the island. By presenting himself as vulnerable and needy, he ensured that his target would not immediately flee or cry out for help. The woman, reacting with normal human empathy, simply pointed him toward a different direction, indicating neighbors who were known to assist those struggling with homelessness. She then turned her attention back to her yard work, believing the brief, mundane interaction had concluded. It was in that precise moment of lowered guard that the predator unleashed a sudden, overwhelming torrent of violence. He overpowered the 52-year-old woman with terrifying speed, dragging her forcefully to the rear of the property, where they were shielded from the view of the street and neighboring homes. What followed was a prolonged, agonizing nightmare. The attacker subjected her to a vicious physical beating, inflicting severe trauma that included a violently broken arm, effectively neutralizing her ability to physically defend herself against his immense strength. Following the devastating blunt force trauma, she was sexually assaulted, mirroring the horrific pattern established in the murder of Lisa Bissell. But the attacker was not finished. He produced a knife, the signature instrument of death in this terrifying series of crimes, and plunged it toward the woman's chest with lethal intent. It was at this exact moment that an inexplicable, miraculous physical anomaly altered the course of the attack and ultimately saved her life. As the blade drove downward, it struck the woman's sternum, the heavy bone situated in the center of the chest. The force of the impact against the bone caused the knife to either bend severely or break entirely, rendering the weapon useless. Stripped of his primary tool of murder, and perhaps startled by the sudden failure of his weapon, the attacker made the abrupt decision to abandon the assault. He discarded the ruined knife at the scene and fled into the surrounding landscape, leaving his victim critically injured, bleeding, and entirely alone in the hidden rear of her own property. What transpired next is one of the most agonizing, awe-inspiring testaments to the human will to survive ever documented in the criminal history of the island. The 52-year-old woman was suffering from catastrophic injuries. Her arm was shattered, her body was battered from the severe beating, and she had sustained a critical stab wound to her chest area. She was losing blood and experiencing a level of physical shock that would incapacitate most individuals. Standing up and walking to a telephone or calling out for a neighbor was physically impossible. Yet, lying on the ground behind her home, she understood with terrifying clarity that if she simply remained there, waiting for someone to happen upon her, she would inevitably succumb to her horrific injuries and die. Refusing to become the second casualty of the phantom killer, she began to move. Inch by excruciating inch, she dragged her broken body across the ground. This was not a quick movement. It was an agonizing, hours-long crawl driven by pure, unadulterated survival instinct. She fought against passing out, fought against the searing pain in her chest and her shattered arm, pulling herself across the earth in a desperate bid to reach a vantage point where she could signal for help. Her unbelievable resilience eventually paid off. She managed to secure assistance and was rushed to emergency medical care, where the trauma teams fought to stabilize her. She had survived the monster of West Kauai. Crucially, because she had lived through the ordeal, she brought with her the most valuable piece of investigative evidence possible. She had stared directly into the eyes of the man who was hunting the women of the island, and she could vividly remember his face. Despite the existence of a surviving witness and a terrifyingly clear pattern of predatory behavior, the summer months dragged on with the perpetrator remaining completely at large, a silent ghost moving through the warm island nights. The tragic culmination of this violent spree occurred at the very end of August, proving that the killer had not only remained active, but had escalated his level of brutality to an unimaginable degree. On the 30th of August, the body of 43-year-old Darren Singer was discovered in a highly secluded, remote campsite situated near Pakala Point Beach. When investigators arrived at the grim scene, it became immediately, devastatingly apparent that they were dealing with the same perpetrator. Forensic analysis later determined that Darren had been murdered at least 12 hours prior to the gruesome discovery of her remains. The violence inflicted upon her was absolute and staggering, representing a terrifying escalation from the previous two attacks. Like Lisa Bissell and the survivor in Keikaha, Darren had been sexually assaulted and stabbed with a knife. However, the level of blunt force trauma she endured was unprecedented in the series. Contemporary reports detailed that the 43-year-old woman had been beaten with such extreme, unrelenting ferocity that her face was left entirely deformed and unrecognizable. The sheer rage and physical dominance required to inflict such catastrophic damage spoke to a predator who was completely out of control, utterly unburdened by any shred of human empathy, and entirely comfortable executing his horrific acts in the vast, empty spaces of the western shore. With the discovery of Darren Singer, the police and the terrified public could no longer deny the grim reality facing the island community. The authorities were dealing with 3 women, 3 separate but identically patterned attacks, all contained within the same broad geographic theater of Western Kauai. The sequence of events painted a horrifyingly clear picture of a highly organized, sexually motivated serial killer who utilized the isolated environment to his extreme advantage. He was a phantom who knew exactly how to blend into the scenery, how to identify women who were vulnerable and alone, and how to use deceptive conversation to lower their defenses before unleashing unimaginable violence. He was a man who brought a knife to isolated dirt roads and quiet residential yards, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives, physical evidence, and an entire island population paralyzed by fear. The timeline from April to August of the year 2000 stands as the darkest chapter in the modern history of the island, a chronological map of suffering that began in a ditch near Polihale, moved into a quiet yard in Keikaha, and ended with unspeakable brutality near the waves of Pakala Point. The surviving woman's agonizing crawl for life remained the sole flicker of defiance against a predator who had otherwise successfully weaponized the very beauty and isolation of paradise to mask his terrible crimes. The discovery of the 3rd victim fundamentally shifted the paradigm for the Kauai Police Department, transforming a series of alarming incidents into a confirmed, horrifying pattern of serial violence. Investigators sitting in the quiet, tense rooms of the precinct could no longer view the tragedy of the first victim in the ditch, the miraculous survival of the homeowner, and the brutalized remains of the camper as isolated anomalies. The connective tissue binding these 3 horrific events was entirely undeniable, forming a modus operandi that was as specific as it was terrifying. When detectives meticulously mapped the crimes, the geographic clustering was immediately glaring. All 3 incidents occurred within a highly specific, geographically isolated corridor on the western side of the island. Beyond geography, the victimology was frighteningly consistent. The perpetrator was exclusively targeting women who were entirely alone, identifying individuals who were physically vulnerable due to their isolation in remote or undefended environments. Furthermore, the mechanics of the assaults mirrored one another with chilling precision. Each encounter involved a sexual assault, indicating a clear, predatory motivation. Each attack featured the infliction of severe blunt force trauma, demonstrating a physical dominance and a capacity for explosive rage that overwhelmed the victims before they could mount a meaningful defense. Most definitively, the presence of a knife in every single incident served as the ultimate signature of the perpetrator. This was not a weapon of opportunity picked up at the scene. It was an instrument brought deliberately into these desolate spaces, a chosen tool of intimidation and execution that cemented the theory of a single, highly organized serial killer operating freely within the tropical landscape. Constructing a psychological profile of the suspect based on this rigidly defined modus operandi revealed a predator who was exceptionally cunning and dangerously comfortable in the shadows of the island. The behavioral analysts and local investigators recognized that they were hunting someone with an intimate, ingrained knowledge of Western Kauai. This was not a transient tourist stumbling randomly through the brush. The killer demonstrated a deep, functional understanding of the topography, knowing precisely which dirt roads were abandoned after sunset, which campsites were shrouded by heavy vegetation, and which residential properties offered the necessary concealment for an extended, violent assault. His ability to navigate the punishing dirt paths near Polihale and the dense coastal brush of Pakala Point without drawing attention to himself suggested a man who belonged to the landscape, someone who perhaps worked outdoors or spent his personal time traversing the rugged terrain. Moreover, his method of approach, particularly as detailed by the lone survivor, highlighted a terrifying level of social camouflage. By presenting himself as a vulnerable, homeless individual in need of assistance, he completely bypassed the natural alarm systems of his targets. This tactic required a chilling degree of sociopathic calculation. He understood the culture of the island, recognizing that the women of Kauai were culturally conditioned to be helpful and hospitable, and he weaponized that very kindness to close the physical distance between himself and his victims. The profile that emerged was that of a social chameleon, a man who could easily mask his predatory nature behind a facade of normalcy or pathetic vulnerability, allowing him to walk freely through the community by day while transforming into an apex predator in the isolated darkness. Armed with this horrifying profile, the investigation pinned its most desperate hopes on the golden evidence provided by the sole surviving victim. Her agonizing fight for life in Keikaha had yielded the most valuable asset a police department can possess in a hunt for a serial offender, which was a first-hand, detailed visual description of the attacker. Working closely with specialized forensic artists, the brave survivor endured the traumatic process of reliving her darkest moments to construct a composite sketch of the man who had tried to end her life. Every curve of the jaw, the shape of the eyes, and the texture of the hair were meticulously debated and rendered onto paper. When the final sketch was completed, authorities believed they held the key to unlocking the mystery. They distributed the image across the island with unprecedented urgency, blanketing local newspapers, television broadcasts, and community bulletin boards with the face of the suspected killer. In a population of only 56,000 people, where degrees of separation are exceptionally small, investigators were incredibly confident that the sketch would trigger an immediate wave of identification. They waited for the phone lines to light up with calls from neighbors, coworkers, or family members recognizing the chillingly ordinary face staring back at them from the front pages. However, the anticipated breakthrough never materialized. The public response was characterized by a baffling, agonizing silence. Despite the intense media saturation and the heightened state of terror gripping the community, no definitive, actionable tip emerged. The failure of the composite sketch to produce a name was a devastating psychological blow to the investigation, underscoring the terrifying reality that a man capable of such monstrous acts was somehow managing to exist entirely undetected within a small, heavily interconnected island community. While the composite sketch failed to yield a human identification, the investigators held a second, scientifically profound trump card that elevated this case above standard, unsolvable historical mysteries. They possessed the biological footprint of the killer. The brutality and the intimate nature of the sexual assaults meant that the perpetrator had unknowingly left behind his own cellular material at the crime scenes. In the realm of cold case investigations, securing a clean, viable DNA profile is often regarded as the ultimate silver bullet, an irrefutable biological barcode that can pierce through any alibi, any social camouflage, and any passage of time. The Kauai Police Department had the science of modern forensics on their side, possessing a sample that could theoretically be matched against state and national databases to instantly unmask the phantom. Yet, the promise of this genetic evidence transformed into the most excruciating twist of the entire investigation. Having the DNA and having a definitive match are two vastly different realities in the world of criminal justice. The recovered biological material was analyzed, processed, and prepared for comparison, serving as an invisible, silent witness waiting for the correct suspect to be placed before it. But without a corresponding name already in the system, or without a perfectly clear sample to definitively tie a newly developed suspect to the absolute exclusion of all others, the DNA remained a locked door. It was a tantalizing, frustrating guarantee that the killer could be definitively proven guilty if only he could be found, yet it offered absolutely no direction on how to actually find him in the vast expanses of the island. As the pressure from a terrified public reached a boiling point, the police intensified their efforts to screen known dangerous individuals currently residing on the island, leading them directly to a man named Waldorf Wilson, often referred to as Wally. His background immediately sent red flags skyrocketing through the investigative team. Wilson was a convicted felon with a documented history of severe, predatory violence against women. In the year 1983, on the neighboring island of Oahu, he had been convicted of rape and kidnapping, crimes that bore a disturbing philosophical resemblance to the horrific acts now plaguing Western Kauai. Wilson had served his time and was released on parole in January of 1999. Crucially, the timeline of his movements aligned with terrifying precision to the emergence of the serial killer. Official appellate court records confirm that Wilson relocated to Kauai in early 2000, just months before the mutilated body of Lisa Bissell was discovered near Polihale. For investigators desperate to stop the bloodshed, Wilson represented the perfect suspect. He had the violent history, the capability for sexual predation, and he had arrived in the exact geographic theater right before the curtain rose on the tragedy. The police directed their intense focus toward him, hoping that a comparison of his genetic material with the biological evidence recovered from the crime scenes would finally close the net around the monster. However, the scientific reality delivered a crushing, ambiguous blow to the investigation. The laboratory results comparing his DNA to the crime scene samples did not produce a definitive match, nor did they produce an absolute exclusion. The results were officially reported as inconclusive. This meant that legally and scientifically, Waldorf Wilson could not be definitively linked to the murders of Lisa Bissell and Darren Singer, nor the attack on the survivor in Keikaha. The investigation was thrown into a state of legal limbo, possessing a prime suspect whose background perfectly fit the profile, but lacking the concrete forensic certainty required to charge a man with multiple counts of serial homicide. The immense frustration felt by the detectives was entirely overwhelming as they stared at the reports on their desks. They were trapped in a procedural nightmare where intuition and circumstantial alignment violently collided with the rigid, uncompromising requirements of the modern judicial system. The suffocating atmosphere of late summer 2000 on Kauai was unlike anything the island had ever experienced. The residents were trapped in a state of suspended terror, waiting for the phantom of the West Side to strike again. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, and every isolated stretch of road felt like a potential crime scene. The Kauai Police Department was operating under a level of scrutiny and desperate urgency that pushed their resources and their psychological endurance to the absolute breaking point. They possessed a prime suspect in Waldorf Wilson, a man whose violent history and geographical proximity perfectly aligned with the terrifying pattern of the murders, yet they were completely paralyzed by the inconclusive nature of the biological evidence. They could not arrest him for the murders of Lisa Bissell and Darren Singer, nor could they charge him with the brutal assault of the survivor in Keikaha. However, the authorities were not entirely powerless. Because Wilson had been released from an Oahu prison on parole, he was subject to strict, uncompromising conditions regarding his behavior and his movements. In September of that year, just weeks after the mutilated body of the third victim was discovered near Pakala Point, the police found their lever. Wilson was arrested and taken into custody, not under the glaring, momentous spotlight of a serial murder indictment, but for violating the mundane, administrative terms of his parole. The specific details of the violation were secondary to the immediate, practical outcome it achieved for law enforcement. The man they heavily suspected of being a monster was suddenly removed from the vulnerable environment of the island and placed securely behind the thick walls of a holding facility. He was no longer free to roam the dirt roads or blend into the rural communities of the Western Shore. What followed the incarceration of Waldorf Wilson was one of the most profound, deeply unsettling silences in the modern history of criminal investigations. The island community, bracing itself for the inevitable news of another brutalized woman, waited in a state of agonizing tension. Days slowly bled into weeks, and weeks gradually transitioned into the cooler, rainier months of autumn and winter. Yet, the police radios remained silent regarding the specific, horrifying violence that had defined the spring and summer. There were no more women found battered and stabbed in desolate drainage ditches. There were no more terrifying reports of a man posing as a homeless wanderer to gain access to private yards. The highly specific, rigidly defined pattern of sexual assault, blunt force trauma, and knife violence directed at isolated women on the west side of Kauai completely and abruptly ceased. The cessation of the crimes was as sudden and dramatic as their initial eruption. For the terrified residents of the island, this sudden peace felt like a collective exhalation, a desperate, silent prayer that the nightmare had finally concluded. For the investigators pacing the floors of the precinct, the silence was deafening. The timeline presented a narrative that was almost impossible to ignore. A convicted violent sexual offender arrives on the island, and a horrifying series of murders begins. The same offender is taken off the streets and securely locked away, and the murders instantly stop. The correlation was immensely powerful, creating a psychological certainty among many within the community and law enforcement that they had successfully, albeit indirectly, neutralized the Kauai serial killer. However, the fundamental bedrock of the American criminal justice system relies entirely on the absolute distinction between a highly compelling coincidence and beyond a reasonable doubt evidence. A timeline, no matter how perfectly aligned or suspiciously convenient, does not equate to a legal conviction. Human beings are naturally wired to recognize patterns and draw immediate conclusions to restore a sense of safety and order to a chaotic world. It was incredibly easy, and perhaps psychologically necessary, for the traumatized residents of Kauai to look at the timeline and decide that Waldorf Wilson was the monster who had terrorized their shores. But the law demands a vastly higher threshold of truth. The uncomfortable, unyielding reality of criminal investigation is that a perpetrator might cease their violent activities for a multitude of reasons entirely unrelated to an arrest. A serial killer might simply decide to relocate to a different geographic region, taking their violent compulsions to a new, unsuspecting population. They might succumb to a fatal illness or suffer a fatal accident. They might experience a profound psychological shift that temporarily suppresses their urge to kill. Or, most terrifyingly, the true perpetrator might simply decide to stop, slipping back into the fabric of society to live a quiet, ordinary life while an entirely innocent, albeit troubled, man takes the blame in the court of public opinion. Therefore, the fact that the violent attacks on the West Side halted immediately upon the arrest of a specific parolee could not, and did not, serve as definitive legal proof of his guilt in those specific, horrific crimes. The complex, deeply frustrating nature of this legal limbo eventually spilled into the civil courtrooms years after the initial wave of terror had subsided. Waldorf Wilson, firmly maintaining his innocence regarding the serial killings, launched a significant legal counteroffensive against the authorities and the media organizations that had heavily scrutinized him. He filed a comprehensive lawsuit, articulating a profound grievance against the systemic machinery of the state. His legal arguments were rooted in the assertion that the police, desperate to solve the most high-profile and terrifying case in the history of the island, had unfairly targeted him due to his past criminal record rather than concrete evidence. He alleged that the intense, suffocating surveillance, the aggressive investigative tactics, and the ultimate revocation of his parole were the direct result of law enforcement improperly branding him as a serial murderer. He claimed that this unofficial designation, heavily amplified by media reports speculating on his involvement, destroyed his reputation, inflicted severe emotional distress, and unjustly deprived him of his freedom. The legal battle traversed the judicial system, ultimately reaching the Hawaii Appellate Court. The higher court was tasked with examining the intricate balance between a police department's duty to investigate a horrific string of murders and the constitutional rights of an individual with a criminal past. Ultimately, the appellate court upheld the dismissal of Wilson's claims, ruling in favor of the agencies and the media. The judicial decision effectively shielded the police and the press from financial liability, but it did absolutely nothing to resolve the underlying, agonizing mystery of the murders themselves. The lawsuit served only to highlight the immense, destructive friction generated when a desperate investigation collides with the rigid boundaries of legal proof. We must dwell on the absolute, unvarnished legal reality that defines the legacy of this case. It is a reality that is deeply unsatisfying, endlessly frustrating, and heartbreaking for the families of the victims. Waldorf Wilson was never charged with the murder of Lisa Bissell. He was never charged with the attempted murder of the 52-year-old woman in Keikaha. He was never charged with the brutal slaying of Darren Singer. He never stood trial for these specific atrocities, he never faced a jury of his peers regarding these crimes, and he was never pronounced guilty by a judge. The biological evidence, the highly anticipated DNA that was supposed to serve as the ultimate arbiter of truth, failed to provide the necessary forensic absolution or condemnation. Because the DNA results were officially classified as inconclusive, the state lacked the fundamental foundation required to build a prosecution. A prosecutor cannot walk into a courtroom carrying nothing but a highly suspicious timeline and a defendant's past criminal record. The law requires scientific certainty or unimpeachable witness testimony, and in the case of the Kauai serial killer, both remained agonizingly out of reach. We are left looking at a terrifying chasm between suspicion and conviction. A man was taken off the streets, the killing stopped, and a community quietly decided the nightmare was over. But true justice does not operate in the shadows of assumption. True justice requires the undeniable illumination of facts. Because those facts could never be definitively established, the legal system was forced to leave the door perpetually open. The phantom who stalked the western shores of the island was never officially captured, never named in an indictment, and never brought to answer for the lives he shattered, leaving the case suspended in a permanent, haunting twilight zone of unresolved trauma. The passage of time is often described as a healing force, a natural current that slowly washes away the sharp edges of tragedy and allows a wounded community to rebuild its sense of normalcy. But on the island of Kauai, particularly along the isolated western shores, time has not entirely erased the deep, psychological scars inflicted during the spring and summer of the year 2000. The landscape remains as breathtakingly beautiful as it was before the violence began. The red dirt roads still stretch toward the sheer cliffs of the Na Pali coast. The waves continue to crash against the remote sands of Pakala Point, and the sun still sets in a blaze of colors over the quiet plantation towns. Yet, a fundamental innocence was irrevocably lost. The collective memory of the community holds a permanent shadow, a lingering awareness that the pristine paradise they call home was once transformed into a hunting ground by a predator who was never officially brought to justice. The trauma of those months altered the behavioral DNA of the island. The unwritten social contract of absolute safety was torn apart. Today, even as new generations grow up and tourists continue to flock to the beaches, there remains a quiet, unspoken vigilance among the locals who remember the terror. They remember when the vast, beautiful isolation of the west side suddenly felt like a trap, and they remember the haunting realization that a monster was moving freely among them, breathing the same air and navigating the same two-lane highways. The most agonizing aspect of this enduring trauma is the absolute absence of closure. The human mind craves resolution. We construct narratives with clear endings, where the villain is unmasked, the threat is neutralized, and justice is definitively served. The Kauai serial killer case denies us this fundamental psychological necessity. Instead of a courtroom conviction and a locked prison cell, we are left staring into a terrifying void, forced to grapple with the reality that a man capable of unspeakable brutality simply vanished from the narrative. The sudden cessation of the murders in late summer leaves investigators and the public wrestling with four distinct, deeply unsettling possibilities regarding the ultimate fate of the phantom. These theories represent the only logical pathways to explain how a highly organized, sexually motivated serial murderer could abruptly halt a terrifying escalation of violence. The first and perhaps most chilling possibility is that the killer simply left the island. Serial predators are often driven by a compulsion that requires a specific environment to operate safely. If the intense police scrutiny, the media saturation, and the heightened public vigilance on Kauai made it impossible for him to hunt without immediate detection, he might have chosen to relocate. The geography of Hawaii, a chain of islands connected by brief flights, or the vast expanse of the mainland United States, offers countless environments where a predator could start entirely anew. If this theory holds true, it means the monster of West Kauai did not stop killing. He simply changed his hunting grounds, carrying his horrific compulsions to a new, unsuspecting population that remained entirely ignorant of the blood on his hands. This possibility extends the nightmare far beyond the shores of the island, suggesting a phantom who continues to move freely through the world. The second theory proposes a more definitive, structural end to the violence. It suggests that the perpetrator was incapacitated, either through death or incarceration for an entirely separate, unrelated offense. The criminal lifestyle is inherently volatile. A man capable of such extreme violence might easily find himself involved in other dangerous activities, leading to a fatal accident, a lethal confrontation, or an arrest for a crime that law enforcement never managed to connect back to the horrific events on Kauai. In this scenario, the killer is neutralized, but the justice system remains completely unaware of the true magnitude of his crimes. The biological evidence, the composite sketch, and the agonized cries of the community remain suspended in a cold case file, while the perpetrator sits in a prison cell under a different charge, or lies in a nameless grave, taking the secrets of Polihale and Pakala to the end of his existence. The third possibility ventures into the complex, fiercely debated realm of criminal psychology. It is the theory that the killer simply made a conscious decision to stop offending. For decades, traditional profiling models suggested that a serial killer could not voluntarily cease their activities, that the internal compulsion to kill was an unbreakable addiction that would inevitably drive them to strike again until they were captured or killed. However, modern criminological studies have revealed that in exceptionally rare circumstances, a serial offender can actually age out of their violent compulsions or experience a significant lifestyle change that temporarily or permanently suppresses their predatory urges. Perhaps a change in living situation, a sudden illness, or an overwhelming fear of the advancing forensic technology force the killer into a state of permanent dormancy. This theory is perhaps the most difficult to accept, as it requires us to imagine a man who committed acts of unimaginable savagery successfully blending back into the mundane fabric of society, living a quiet, unremarkable life while harboring the darkest of secrets. The fourth and final theory is an investigative nightmare. It posits the terrifying idea that the killer did not stop, did not die, and did not leave, but rather altered his modus operandi so significantly that subsequent crimes were never officially connected to the original sequence on the West Side. While the pattern of targeting isolated women with a knife and blunt force trauma was rigid during that specific spring and summer, a highly intelligent predator might recognize the need to evolve in order to evade capture. If he changed his weapon, his victimology, or his geographic theater of operation, law enforcement might mistakenly categorize future attacks as isolated incidents rather than the continuation of a serial pattern. This theory implies that the true victim count is higher than officially recognized, and that the killer successfully outsmarted the investigative machinery designed to stop him. Because there is no definitive forensic or testimonial evidence to validate any single one of these four possibilities over the others, the identity of the perpetrator remains locked in a state of permanent ambiguity. It is crucial to understand that the label of the Kauai serial killer is not a title assigned to a convicted individual by a court of law. It is a placeholder, a grim moniker created by investigators and the public to describe an unidentified subject responsible for a specific reign of terror. It is a name for a ghost. The fact that a prominent suspect was identified, scrutinized, and ultimately legally cleared due to inconclusive biological evidence only deepens the tragedy. It highlights the agonizing limitations of human justice, demonstrating how a community can look directly at a series of horrific events and still find themselves unable to bridge the gap between suspicion and concrete, undeniable proof. Despite the passage of decades, the official record refuses to let the memory of these atrocities fade entirely into the archives. The Kauai County Prosecuting Attorney currently maintains an active, open cold case file regarding the brutal murder of Lisa Bissell. The official public documentation still clearly outlines the grim facts of April 7, 2000, when a 38-year-old woman was found with multiple stab wounds in a ditch along the road to Polihale. The prosecutor's office continues to issue a standing plea to the public, urging anyone with any fragment of information, no matter how seemingly insignificant, to come forward and contact their investigators. This open file is a powerful, enduring statement. It is a declaration that the passage of time does not diminish the value of a human life, and that the pursuit of truth, even when the trail has grown cold, is a fundamental moral obligation. It proves that law enforcement has not surrendered, and that they continue to wait for the single missing piece of the puzzle that could finally unlock the identity of the Phantom. Ultimately, the story of the West Kauai serial killer is not just a narrative about an elusive predator or a frustrated police investigation. It is, at its very core, a story about the profound, irreplaceable loss of human life and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. We must never allow the monstrous actions of an unknown killer to overshadow the humanity of the women he targeted. We must remember Lisa Bissell, a 38-year-old woman whose life was violently interrupted, leaving a permanent void in the quiet community of Hanapepe. We must honor the memory of Darren Singer, a 43-year-old visitor who sought peace and communion with nature, only to encounter unimaginable cruelty under the tropical stars. Their lives were significant, their futures were stolen, and they deserve to be remembered not merely as victims in a cold case file, but as vibrant individuals who loved and were loved in return. And we must hold in the highest regard the incredible, awe-inspiring courage of the 52-year-old survivor. Faced with absolute terror in the assumed safety of her own yard, suffering from catastrophic injuries that would have extinguished the will of most individuals, she chose to fight. Her agonizing crawl across the dirt was a profound act of defiance against a predator who sought to erase her. She lived to look the monster in the eye, and she carried the heavy, traumatic burden of providing the only visual roadmap the police ever had. She is the living embodiment of survival, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest, most isolated corners of paradise, the human will to live can overpower the most terrifying forces of violence. The west side of Kauai will forever bear the scars of that terrible year, but as long as the cases remain open, and as long as we continue to speak the names of the victims, the pursuit of justice will never truly be abandoned. The Phantom may have vanished into the shadows, but the memory of the women he harmed remains a powerful, undying light, waiting for the day when the truth is finally dragged out into the sun. The passage of time on an island like Kauai possesses a strange and deceptive quality because the physical landscape remains so stubbornly unchanged despite the profound human tragedies that have occurred upon its shores. When you stand on the western edge of the island today, looking out over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, or walking along the deeply rutted dirt roads that lead toward the sheer towering cliffs of the Na Pali coast, it is incredibly easy to believe that this place has only ever known absolute peace and natural harmony. The warm trade winds still blow through the emerald canopies with the same gentle rhythm, and the sun still bakes the red dirt of the agricultural fields, creating a vibrant contrast against the deep blue water that draws thousands of visitors every single year. Tourists continue to flock to these remote beaches seeking an escape from the anxieties of the modern world, entirely unaware that the very isolation they crave was once weaponized by a phantom who used the profound silence of this beautiful terrain to mask unspeakable acts of violence. But for the local community, the families who have lived on this island for generations and who intimately remember the suffocating terror that descended during the spring and summer of the year 2000, the landscape carries a permanent and deeply unsettling duality. Every beautiful sunset over Polihale and every quiet morning in the historic plantation towns of Kekaha and Hanapepe is viewed through the lingering shadow of a nightmare that was never officially resolved. The collective memory of the island is scarred by the knowledge that a predator hunted in their backyards, targeting vulnerable women who were entirely alone, and that this predator was never forced to stand in a courtroom to answer for the lives he brutally shattered. This lingering, unresolved trauma is the defining characteristic of a cold case, and it is a burden that rests heavily upon the shoulders of the investigators who worked tirelessly to bring the monster to justice, and the families who are forever trapped in a state of suspended grief. In the world of criminal justice, a closed case provides a definitive narrative arc supplying a beginning, a middle, and a crucial endpoint where society formally acknowledges the wrongdoing and imposes a penalty upon the guilty party. But an unsolved series of murders denies everyone this fundamental psychological necessity, leaving behind a gaping void filled only with terrifying questions and agonizing what-ifs. The case of the Kauai serial killer is particularly haunting precisely because it was not completely devoid of evidence or promising investigative leads. The authorities possessed the behavioral pattern, the geographic profile, a first-hand description from a miraculous survivor, and most tantalizingly the biological footprint of the killer himself, left behind in the form of DNA. The existence of this genetic material elevates the tragedy from a simple unsolved mystery to a profound technological frustration because the answer theoretically exists encoded within microscopic cells resting in an evidence locker waiting for a breakthrough that has yet to arrive. The fact that the DNA analysis yielded an inconclusive result when compared to the prime suspect Waldorf-Wilson highlights the agonizing limitations of science and the strict, unyielding demands of the legal system. The investigators were forced to navigate a maddening chasm between their professional intuition, which heavily suspected a man with a documented history of severe predatory violence who had arrived on the island just before the killings began, and the rigid evidentiary threshold required to secure a criminal indictment. They watched helplessly as the attacks abruptly ceased the moment Wilson was incarcerated for a parole violation, a sequence of events that offered a powerful circumstantial conclusion, but completely lacked the forensic certainty necessary for a murder trial. The subsequent legal battles initiated by Wilson, who adamantly maintained his innocence and sued the authorities for wrongful scrutiny, only deepened the complexity of the narrative, underscoring the destructive friction that occurs when the desperation to catch a killer collides with the presumption of innocence. Because Wilson was never convicted, and because the forensic evidence could not definitively link him to the atrocities, the true identity of the man who stalked the Western Shores remains an open, terrifying question. We are forced to confront the four unsettling possibilities regarding his ultimate fate: whether he simply left the island to continue his horrific compulsions elsewhere, whether he died or was imprisoned for an entirely unrelated crime, whether he miraculously suppressed his violent urges and assimilated back into society, or whether he altered his methods so drastically that his subsequent crimes were never connected to the original pattern. None of these theoretical outcomes offer any genuine comfort to the community or to the loved ones of the victims, because none of them provide the accountability that true justice demands. The lack of a definitive resolution means that the ghost of the West Side continues to haunt the margins of island life, serving as a constant grim reminder that evil can exist and operate even in the most beautiful places on Earth. Yet amid this enduring darkness, the incredible resilience of the human spirit remains the most powerful and enduring legacy of the entire tragedy. We must never allow the unresolved nature of the investigation or the terrifying anonymity of the killer to overshadow the profound courage and the intrinsic value of the women who found themselves in his path. The survivor, who fought for her life in her own yard in Keikaha, represents the ultimate triumph of human will over monstrous violence. Despite suffering catastrophic injuries, including a shattered arm and a severe knife strike that miraculously failed, she refused to surrender to the darkness, choosing instead to drag her broken body across the earth in a desperate, agonizing crawl toward survival. Her ability to endure unimaginable trauma and to stare directly into the face of evil provided the investigation with its only visual anchor, the composite sketch that still serves as a chilling testament to the reality of the threat. She embodies the fierce, unyielding strength of the island community, a strength that refuses to be entirely extinguished even when confronted by the most horrific manifestations of human cruelty. We must also ensure that the memories of Lisa Bissell and Darren Singer are preserved with the utmost dignity and respect, refusing to let them be defined solely by the violent manner in which their lives were taken. Lisa was 38 years old, deeply woven into the fabric of Hanapepe, moving through the familiar routines of island life before she was violently erased and discarded in a desolate drainage ditch. Darren was 43 years old, seeking peace and a connection with nature at a remote campsite near Pakala Point, entirely unaware that the very isolation she valued would be weaponized against her. They were not mere statistics in a cold case file, but vibrant, complex human beings whose absence left permanent, unfillable voids in the lives of those who loved them. The fact that the Kauai County prosecuting attorney continues to maintain an open, active cold case file for Lisa Bissell is a crucial administrative and moral declaration that their lives mattered and that the pursuit of truth has no expiration date. It is a standing promise to the community that law enforcement remains vigilant, waiting for the single technological advancement or the one courageous witness that could finally shatter the silence and bring the phantom into the light of accountability. Until that day arrives, the story of the West Kauai serial killer serves as a solemn cautionary tale, a reminder that paradise is not immune to the darkness of the human heart and that safety is an illusion we construct to navigate a dangerously unpredictable world. Almost every single unsolved murder leaves a microscopic tear in the social fabric, an invisible wound that requires constant acknowledgement to prevent it from festering into complete apathy. When we refuse to look away from these dark chapters, we actively participate in a collective vigil, maintaining a beacon of hope for the families who still wait for a knock on their doors. The passage of 26 years has not diminished the horrifying reality of what happened during those sweltering months, nor has it lessened the moral imperative to continue searching for answers. We must consciously choose to carry the weight of this history, allowing it to sharpen our empathy and fortify our resolve against the encroaching shadows. True justice may remain frustratingly elusive, but our steadfast remembrance serves as the ultimate defiance against the unidentified serial killer. We tell this story not to sensationalize the violence, but to bear witness to the suffering, to honor the sheer force of survival, and to ensure that the women who were hunted on those lonely dirt roads are never forgotten by a world that moves too quickly past its unresolved tragedies. Their memory demands our unwavering attention and our eternal respect. As the decades continue to unfurl beneath the eternal Hawaiian sun, the shadow cast by the unsolved murders on the western shores of Kauai slowly morphs from a sharp, immediate terror into a dull, enduring ache that is deeply woven into the generational memory of the island. The physical world moves forward with an agonizing indifference to human suffering as the red dirt roads are smoothed by the relentless coastal winds and the ocean tides endlessly erase and remake the sandy stretches of Pakala Point, where dark secrets remain buried under the weight of time. But within the quiet rooms of the police precinct and the private homes of retired investigators, the passage of time does not represent a fading of duty, but rather an agonizing accumulation of days spent wondering how the phantom managed to slip through their grasp. These are the men and women who walked the brutalized crime scenes, who looked into the shattered faces of the victims, and who sat in silent frustration as the limits of early forensic science prevented them from locking a monster away in a concrete cell. They carry the profound psychological burden of the unresolved and invisible weight that haunts their quiet moments and forces them to replay every single decision, every single interview, and every single piece of collected evidence in a perpetual loop of desperate retroactive analysis. The landscape of criminal investigation, however, is not a static entity. It is a constantly evolving discipline that inches ever closer toward an absolute and unforgiving light. The biological evidence recovered from those horrifying crime scenes in the year 2000, the microscopic cellular material left behind by a predator who believed he was invincible, currently sits in secure temperature-controlled storage, acting as a silent biological time bomb waiting for the precise moment when scientific advancement finally catches up with his immense cruelty. We are now living in an era where the forensic limitations of the past are being systematically dismantled by the incredible power of genetic genealogy and advanced DNA phenotyping technologies that have the unprecedented ability to reach backward through decades of silence to tear the mask off previously untouchable phantoms. The inconclusive DNA results that severely paralyzed the initial investigation and ultimately prevented the prosecution of the prime suspect might no longer serve as an impenetrable shield for the killer, because modern laboratories can now extract deeply complex genetic profiles from the most degraded and microscopic samples. This scientific revolution means that the monster who stalked the isolated beaches and quiet yards of the West Side is living on borrowed time, existing in a state of precarious freedom that could be instantaneously revoked by a single microscopic match in a vast, interconnected familial database. The knowledge that this evidence still exists and still holds the potential for absolute truth serves as a powerful beacon of hope for a community that has spent over 2 decades waiting for a sense of narrative closure. It is a stark, terrifying reminder to the perpetrator that the geographical isolation he once used as a weapon to silence his victims cannot protect him from the relentless, invisible reach of modern science. If he is still alive, drawing breath in some obscure corner of the world, he must wake up every single morning with the cold, paralyzing realization that today might be the day a knock sounds at his door, bringing the accumulated weight of justice crashing down upon his fragile facade of normalcy. If he has already passed away, escaping the immediate physical consequences of the justice system, the science will still inevitably expose his true nature, stripping away any false legacy he may have constructed and branding his name eternally with the horrific atrocities he committed in the dark. The island of Kauai itself stands as a silent witness to this ongoing struggle between the enduring darkness of the unsolved crimes and the relentless pursuit of illumination. The western communities of Hanapepe and Kekaha and Waimea have demonstrated an incredible, awe-inspiring resilience, choosing to reclaim their beautiful environment from the shadow of the predator, without ever disrespecting the memory of the women who were lost. They continue to raise their children to respect the ocean and to love the land, but they also instill a necessary, quiet vigilance, a profound understanding that paradise is a fragile construct that requires constant protection. The trauma of the year 2000 completely shattered the dangerous illusion that geographic isolation equates to absolute safety, forcing the community to recognize that evil does not respect zip codes or tropical latitudes. Yet rather than allowing this realization to rot into widespread cynicism or paralyzing despair, the people of Kauai channeled their collective grief into a fierce, protective solidarity that binds the island together tighter than ever before. They look out for one another in the isolated stretches, they fiercely protect the vulnerable members of their society, and they stubbornly refuse to let the fear dictate the terms of their existence. This incredible communal strength is the ultimate defiance against a killer who sought to sow absolute terror and division, relying on isolation to accomplish his monstrous goals. By choosing connection and resilience, the community actively dismantles the very conditions the predator required to operate, proving that the human spirit is infinitely more powerful than the cowardly violence of a man hiding in the brush. As we reflect on this expansive, devastating narrative, we are continuously drawn back to the absolute center of the tragedy, which is the undeniable, enduring humanity of the three women whose lives intersected with the phantom of the West Side. We must consistently actively refuse to allow their identities to be completely consumed by the grim clinical details of their final moments. Lisa Bissell was a 38-year-old woman with a vibrant history, a place in her community, and a future that was violently stolen from her on a lonely dirt road leading toward the cliffs. Her memory demands our continuous respect and our unwavering commitment to the truth, ensuring that she is not relegated to a mere footnote in a cold case file, but is remembered as a cherished member of the island family. Darren Singer was a 43-year-old traveler who sought out the profound spiritual peace of the natural world, pitching her tent under the expansive tropical sky, only to be met with a cruelty that defies all rational comprehension. Her tragic end serves as a heartbreaking reminder of our inherent vulnerability when we seek solitude, forcing us to demand a world where a woman can sleep under the stars without the terrifying threat of a predator lurking in the shadows. And we must forever elevate the staggering, unimaginable bravery of the 52-year-old survivor who transformed her own horrific victimization into a profound act of resistance. Her agonizing, desperate crawl across the dirt in Kekaha, bleeding and shattered, but absolutely refusing to die, is a sequence of human endurance that should be carved into the very bedrock of the island. She looked into the abyss of human depravity and fought her way back to the surface, carrying the only description of the monster and providing the singular spark of hope in an otherwise completely dark narrative. Her survival is a testament to a strength that the killer could never possibly understand or overcome, a fierce, unyielding life force that ultimately defeated his intention to erase her entirely from the world. The legacy of the Kauai serial killer case is therefore a complex, agonizing tapestry woven from threads of profound grief, enduring mystery, scientific frustration, and absolute human resilience. It is a story that has no definitive ending, yet it demands to be told and retold because the act of remembering is the only weapon we possess against the suffocating silence of an unsolved crime. We speak the facts of the case, we analyze the missteps and the limitations of the investigation, and we honor the victims because doing so keeps the investigative flame alive, preventing the darkness from claiming a permanent victory. The Kauai County prosecuting attorney holding the open case file represents the institutional refusal to forget, acting as the legal guardian of the truth, while the scientific community quietly works in laboratories across the country developing the tools necessary to finally shatter the anonymity of the perpetrator. The red dirt of the West Side may have absorbed the blood, and the ocean winds may have scattered the immediate echoes of the violence, but the fundamental demand for justice remains eternally anchored to the landscape. It is a demand that resonates in the crashing waves at Pakala Point and echoes through the deep silent valleys, a persistent, undeniable frequency that will continue to broadcast until the day the phantom is finally dragged into the light. Until that moment of ultimate reckoning arrives, we stand as witnesses to the tragedy, holding the memories of Lisa and Darren and the brave survivor in our collective consciousness, ensuring that their stories are never buried by the passing years. The true crime is not just the act of murder itself, but the subsequent forgetting of the lives that were taken, and we absolutely refuse to commit that secondary offense. We wait with an unwavering patience, trusting that the arc of the moral universe, no matter how agonizingly long or how heavily obscured by the shadows of paradise, will inevitably bend toward justice, and that the man who brought such profound sorrow to the western shores of Kauai will eventually face the absolute and inescapable consequences of his monstrous actions. The ultimate tragedy of an unresolved serial killer case is the way it forces a beautiful physical environment to serve as a permanent, inescapable mausoleum for the victims whose lives were violently extracted from the world without any subsequent measure of earthly justice. When we observe the western coastline of Kauai today, we are looking at a landscape that has spent more than 2 decades silently absorbing the profound grief and the paralyzing terror that saturated the red dirt during the spring and summer of the year 2000. The towering emerald cliffs of the Na Pali coast and the expansive sun-baked agricultural fields of Keikaha do not possess the capacity to mourn, and the relentless crashing waves at Pakala Point cannot offer any apologies for the horrors they witnessed under the blanket of the tropical night. Nature is entirely indifferent to the suffering of humanity, and it is this very indifference that makes the geography of the West Side feel so incredibly haunting to those who understand the dark history buried beneath the surface of the tourist brochures and the idyllic travel documentaries. The isolation that defines these remote stretches of the island was the precise tool utilized by a highly organized predatory phantom to systematically hunt and destroy women who were simply seeking the peaceful solitude that the island promises to everyone who walks upon its shores. This weaponization of paradise represents a profound betrayal of the fundamental trust that residents and visitors alike place in the natural beauty of Hawaii, creating a psychological wound that has never been allowed to properly heal because the perpetrator was never unmasked and held legally accountable for his monstrous actions. We are left to wander through a permanent state of investigative limbo where the ghosts of the past continue to bleed into the present, demanding an answer that the legal system has thus far been completely unable to provide, despite the existence of highly compelling circumstantial timelines and frustratingly inconclusive biological evidence. The failure of the criminal justice system to convert the genetic material left at the crime scenes into a definitive conviction is a staggering blow to the collective conscience of the community, serving as a bitter daily reminder that the mechanisms designed to protect society are sometimes completely powerless against the calculated brutality of a ghost. This powerlessness is deeply internalized by the dedicated law enforcement officers who have spent years staring at the composite sketch of the suspected killer, tracing the lines of his face, and wondering how a man with such ordinary features could harbor such an unfathomable capacity for extreme sexual violence and blunt force destruction. These investigators carry the heavy unseen burden of the victims' families, a weight that grows more oppressive with every passing year as memories begin to fade and the physical case files slowly accumulate dust in the quiet corners of the county prosecuting attorney's office. Yet the absolute refusal of the local authorities to formally close the investigation regarding the brutal stabbing of 38-year-old Lisa Bissell is a vital necessary act of institutional defiance against the passage of time and the encroaching shadows of public amnesia. By keeping the cold case file officially open and continuously pleading for any individual with hidden knowledge to finally step forward and speak, the authorities are actively declaring that the life of Lisa Bissell possessed an intrinsic, immeasurable value that cannot be erased by the terrifying anonymity of her murderer. They are sending a clear, unwavering message across the decades that the pursuit of truth is not bound by the limitations of a calendar and that the island will never simply accept the unsolved status of these atrocities as a permanent, irreversible reality. This institutional memory is desperately needed because the human mind has a dangerous tendency to file away unresolved trauma in an attempt to restore a functional sense of safety to everyday life. If we allow ourselves to forget the specific agonizing details of what happened to Lisa Bissell and 43-year-old Darren Singer, we are essentially granting the killer the ultimate horrific victory by allowing him to successfully erase their existence from the collective consciousness of the island. We must continuously force ourselves to confront the deeply uncomfortable reality that these two vibrant, complex women were subjected to unimaginable terror and pain in their final moments, completely cut off from any hope of rescue or salvation in the desolate stretches of the Western Shore. We must remember Darren Singer not merely as a tragic figure discovered near a remote campsite, but as a woman who loved the outdoors and traveled across the ocean seeking a profound spiritual connection with the natural world, only to have her life extinguished by an individual entirely devoid of human empathy. We must remember Lisa Bissell as a beloved resident of the Hanapepe community whose sudden violent disappearance sent shockwaves of paralyzing fear through a town that had always prided itself on its quiet, peaceful existence. Their tragic deaths are not just historical data points, they are gaping permanent wounds in the fabric of the community that demand our continuous absolute reverence. Furthermore, we must elevate and forever honor the staggering, unimaginable fortitude displayed by the 52-year-old survivor, whose refusal to succumb to the horrific violence inflicted upon her in Keikaha remains the single most powerful beacon of light in this entire devastating narrative. Her ability to endure a savage physical beating, a terrifying sexual assault, and a lethal knife strike that miraculously failed against her sternum is a testament to a level of raw survival instinct that is almost impossible to comprehend. Her subsequent agonizing hours-long crawl across the dirt while bleeding and suffering from catastrophic injuries represents the ultimate manifestation of human defiance against the forces of absolute darkness. She did not just survive, she fought her way back to the living to ensure that the monster would not remain completely faceless, providing the authorities with the only visual description they would ever obtain and permanently altering the way the island understands the concept of sheer unbreakable strength. Her heroic struggle ensures that the killer did not achieve total absolute domination over his victims, and her continued existence is a daily, living rebuke to the cowardice of a man who preyed upon isolated women in the dark. The legacy of these three women is intricately, inextricably bound to the physical landscape of Western Kauai, transforming the beaches and the dirt roads into sacred memorials that demand our utmost respect and our unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. The story of the Kauai serial killer is a terrifying journey into the darkest extremes of human predation, but it is also a profound exploration of community resilience, the agonizing limitations of the justice system, and the eternal enduring power of memory. As long as the community refuses to let the narrative fade into obscurity, as long as the police department maintains the open files, and as long as the advancements in forensic science continue to push the boundaries of what is possible, there remains a legitimate, tangible hope that the phantom will eventually be dragged out of the shadows and into the harsh, unforgiving light of a courtroom. We are currently living in an era where decades-old mysteries are being solved with increasing regularity through the incredible power of genetic genealogy, offering a realistic pathway to identifying perpetrators who believed they had successfully outrun their horrific pasts. The inconclusive DNA sample resting in the evidence locker is not a dead end, but rather a locked door waiting for the precise technological key that will finally blow this case wide open and expose the true identity of the monster. Whether the perpetrator is currently living a quiet, unassuming life hidden among us, or whether he has already faced the ultimate judgment of death, his name and his absolute guilt must be permanently etched into the historical record so that the families of the victims can finally experience the profound emotional release that only truth can provide. The island of Kauai will forever bear the deep psychological scars of the year 2000, and the western coastline will always carry a haunting duality for those who know the history. But this shared trauma has also forged an unbreakable bond of protective solidarity among the residents. They have learned to balance their deep love for the beauty of their island with a necessary pragmatic understanding of its vulnerabilities, ensuring that the horrific lessons of the past are passed down to future generations to prevent such darkness from ever taking root again. The pursuit of justice for Lisa Bissell-Darren-Singer and the incredibly brave survivor is an eternal moral imperative that transcends the passage of time, the complexities of legal procedure, and the vast, isolating expanse of the Pacific Ocean. We owe it to these women to keep their memories fiercely alive, to speak about their lives with profound empathy, and to relentlessly demand answers from a universe that often seems completely indifferent to the suffering of the innocent. We must stand as unwavering guardians of their legacy, refusing to let the terrifying anonymity of their attackers serve as the final punctuation mark in the story of their lives. The true measure of our humanity is found in how fiercely we advocate for those whose voices were violently stolen from them, and in our absolute refusal to ever stop searching for the face of the monster who shattered the peaceful illusion of paradise. The echoes of those terrible months will continue to resonate through the deep valleys and across the red dirt plains of western Kauai, serving as a constant solemn reminder that while the physical traces of violence may eventually wash away the demand for absolute truth and ultimate accountability, will never ever be silenced. The psychological weight of this unfinished narrative extends far beyond the immediate families and the original investigators, permeating the very cultural identity of the island itself, because an unsolved serial murder fundamentally challenges the communal belief in a just and orderly universe. When a crime of such staggering brutality goes unpunished, it creates a pervasive sense of existential vulnerability, suggesting that the protective barriers we construct around our homes and our loved ones are ultimately fragile and easily bypassed by sheer malicious intent. This vulnerability is especially pronounced on a remote landmass where escape is geometrically limited and the population is intensely interconnected, meaning that the killer was almost certainly a familiar presence, navigating the same grocery aisles, stopping at the same gas stations, and perhaps even offering a friendly nod to the police officers who are desperately hunting him. The terrifying realization that a predator can wear the mask of an ordinary citizen completely undetected is the most enduring horror of this entire saga, forcing the community to grapple with the uncomfortable truth that extreme evil does not always announce itself with a menacing exterior but often hides behind the mundane facade of everyday life. The specific tactic utilized against the survivor in Keikaha, the calculated feigning of homelessness and vulnerability to exploit the deeply ingrained island culture of mutual assistance, remains one of the most chilling aspects of the perpetrator's methodology because it represents a cynical weaponization of human kindness. By transforming empathy into a fatal liability, the killer attempted to poison the very social fabric that makes Kauai such a special and uniquely supportive place to live. Yet despite this horrific violation, the community has stubbornly refused to abandon its core values, choosing instead to maintain its warmth and hospitality, while simultaneously developing a sharper collective intuition regarding personal safety. This delicate balance between remaining open-hearted and staying vigilantly protected is a complex daily negotiation for the residents of the West Side, but it represents a profound victory over the killer's underlying desire to replace community trust with widespread suffocating paranoia. The enduring strength of the Kauai people is a beautiful, defiant counter-narrative to the grim details of the police reports, proving that while a single individual can inflict immense localized suffering, they cannot permanently break the spirit of a united and fiercely resilient population. As the sun continues to sink below the horizon at Polihale, painting the evening sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, it casts long, stretching shadows over the very locations where the unthinkable occurred. These shadows serve as a daily visual metaphor for the lingering mystery, a darkening reminder that the complete story has not yet been written and that the final chapter remains agonizingly blank. But just as the darkness of the night is inevitably followed by the brilliant illumination of the morning, the relentless march of forensic science and the unwavering dedication of those who refuse to forget offer the promise that the truth will eventually rise and shatter the silence. We must remain steadfast in our commitment to this highly anticipated dawn, holding the memories of the victims close to our hearts and projecting a unified demand for justice into the universe. The lives of Lisa Bissell and Darren Singer were profound, irreplaceable gifts to the world, and the astonishing bravery of the survivor is a monument to human fortitude that will forever stand against the tide of time. We speak their names not merely as a recounting of historical facts, but as a solemn, sacred invocation, a promise that they will never be abandoned to the cold anonymity of an unsolved case file. The Phantom of West Kauai may have evaded the immediate grasp of the law, but he can never escape the eternal, relentless pursuit of collective memory, passing this imperative duty from one generation to the next without ever surrendering to despair. We will continue to carry this story forward, passing it through the years like a torch burning against the darkness until the day the evidence finally aligns, the final piece of the puzzle falls precisely into place, and the monster is entirely stripped of his anonymity and forced to answer for the unimaginable pain he brought to the beautiful shores of paradise. The wait has been remarkably long and the frustration has been immeasurable, but the fundamental pursuit of justice for the women of Kauai remains an absolute, unbreakable promise that will endure indefinitely until the very end.